Muhammad Ali's phone rang at 3 in the morning. The voice on the other end made his blood run cold. "Mr. Ali, this is the White House calling. The president would like to schedule a private meeting with you next week." The boxing legend sat up in his bed, his hands trembling slightly from the Parkinson's that had been his silent opponent for years. At 74, Muhammad Ali had faced countless challenges in the ring, but this request felt different. This felt like a fight he wasn't sure he wanted to take. "Tell me more," Ali whispered into the phone, his once booming voice now soft, but still carrying that unmistakable determination. The White House aide explained that President Trump wanted to discuss Ali's legacy and potentially award him a special recognition. It sounded prestigious, honorable even, but something in Ali's gut told him this wasn't about honor at all. If you think you know how this story ends, think again. What Muhammad Ali did next shocked everyone and changed everything. Make sure you're subscribed, because this story will challenge everything you thought you knew about courage. Ali hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling of his Phoenix home. His wife Lonnie was still asleep beside him, unaware that her husband was about to make one of the most controversial decisions of his post-boxing career. The moonlight streamed through their bedroom window, casting shadows that seemed to dance like the opponents he'd once faced. He thought back to 1967, when he'd refused to be drafted into the Vietnam War. That decision had cost him 3.5 years of his prime boxing career, millions of dollars, and nearly destroyed his reputation. But he'd stood by his principles then, and he'd do it again now. The next morning, Ali called his longtime friend and advisor, Gene Kilroy, who lived just 20 minutes away in Scottsdale. "Gene, I need you to come over. We need to talk." When Kilroy arrived, he found Ali sitting in his study, surrounded by newspaper clippings and old photographs from his career. The room smelled of leather and old books, a sanctuary where the greatest boxer of all time often retreated to think. "They want me to meet with Trump," Ali said without preamble. Kilroy raised an eyebrow. "That's interesting. What did you tell them?" "Nothing yet, but I know what I'm going to do." Ali stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, despite the disease that had robbed him of his physical grace. He walked to his desk and pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. "I'm going to write him a letter instead." For the next 2 hours, Ali crafted what would become one of the most powerful pieces of correspondence ever sent to the White House. His handwriting was shaky, but his words were crystal clear. He wrote about respect, about dignity, about what it truly meant to be an American. 3 days later, a simple envelope arrived at the White House. No fancy letterhead, no official seal. Just Muhammad Ali's return address in the corner and the president's name written in that distinctive, trembling handwriting. The letter was delivered directly to the Oval Office during Trump's morning briefing. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders was present, along with several senior advisors. Trump opened the envelope casually, expecting perhaps a polite acceptance or decline. What he read instead made him go silent for a full minute. "Mr. President," the letter began, "I received your invitation to meet at the White House. I am honored that you would think of me, but I must respectfully decline." Trump's expression darkened as he continued reading. The letter went on to explain Ali's position with a clarity that cut through political rhetoric like a knife through butter. "Throughout my life, I have stood for what I believed was right, even when it cost me everything. I stood against a war I believed was wrong. I stood for the rights of all people, regardless of their color, religion, or background. I cannot, in good conscience, stand with policies that I believe divide rather than unite our great nation." The room fell silent. Sanders later described the moment as electric with tension. Trump's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, anger, and something that might have been respect. But the letter wasn't finished. I have always believed that true strength comes not from the power to destroy, but from the power to build up, not from the ability to exclude, but from the wisdom to include. America is great not because we are perfect, but because we strive to be better." Trump set the letter down and looked around the room. His advisers waited for his reaction, unsure whether they were about to witness an explosion of anger or something else entirely. "Get me Muhammad Ali on the phone," Trump said quietly. "Sir, I don't think that's—" one advisor began. "Get him on the phone now." 20 minutes later, Ali's phone rang again. This time, it was the president himself. "Muhammad, this is Donald Trump. I got your letter." Ali's response was measured, respectful, but firm. "Mr. President, I meant every word." "I know you did. That's why I'm calling. You know, not many people have the courage to say no to the President of the United States. I've said no to bigger things than the presidency, Mr. President. I said no to war. I said no to hate. I said no to everything that goes against what I believe America should be." The conversation lasted 15 minutes. By the end, both men had gained something they hadn't expected, a grudging respect for each other's convictions. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about Ali's bold move. But trust me, this is just the beginning. What happened next will blow your mind. Word of Ali's letter began to leak within hours. In today's Washington, secrets have the lifespan of a mayfly, and this was too big to contain. By evening, major news outlets were reporting that Muhammad Ali had declined a White House invitation, though the contents of the letter remained secret. The story exploded across social media. Ali vs. Trump began trending worldwide. Sports commentators, political analysts, and ordinary citizens all weighed in with their opinions. Some praised Ali for standing by his principles. Others criticized him for what they saw as a political stunt. But Ali wasn't paying attention to the noise. He was dealing with something much more personal. His daughter Layla called him that evening, her voice tight with concern. "Dad, are you sure about this? People are saying some pretty harsh things." Ali was sitting in his favorite chair, the one that faced the window overlooking the desert landscape he'd grown to love. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him of the crowds that used to cheer his name. "Layla, baby, let me tell you something. When I was your age, I thought being brave meant getting in the ring and fighting men who wanted to knock my head off. But real courage isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when not to fight and knowing when to stand up for what's right, even when everyone's watching." "But Dad, what if this hurts your legacy?" Ali smiled, that same confident smile that had charmed the world for decades. "My legacy isn't what people say about me today. It's what I do today that matters for tomorrow." Meanwhile, in Washington, the White House was dealing with its own crisis. The story had taken on a life of its own, and Trump's team was scrambling to control the narrative. "We need to get ahead of this," Sanders told her staff during an emergency meeting. "The president looks bad either way. If we attack Ali, we're attacking a beloved American icon. If we don't respond, it looks like we're weak." But Trump had other ideas. The next morning, he did something that surprised everyone, including his own staff. He tweeted about the letter. "Received a thoughtful letter from Muhammad Ali. While we disagree on some issues, I respect his right to his opinion. America is built on the freedom to speak your mind, even to the president, especially to the president." The tweet sent shockwaves through both political parties. Democrats didn't know how to respond to Trump showing restraint and respect. Republicans were confused by what seemed like capitulation to a critic. But Ali understood exactly what had happened. Trump had read between the lines of his letter and recognized something that few politicians ever acknowledge, that true leadership sometimes means admitting when someone else is right. 2 weeks after the letter, something unprecedented happened. Trump called Ali again. Muhammad, I've been thinking about what you wrote, about building up instead of tearing down. I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Ali leaned back in his chair, intrigued despite himself. Go ahead, Mr. President. What would you do? If you were in my position, what would you do to bring people together? It was a question that caught Ali off guard. In all his years of activism and public speaking, no politician had ever asked him for genuine advice. They'd asked for endorsements, for photo opportunities, for his famous name attached to their causes, but never for his actual thoughts on leadership. Ali was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of experience. Mr. President, you want to know what I learned in the ring? The strongest fighters aren't the ones who throw the hardest punches. They're the ones who can take a hit and keep moving forward. They're the ones who study their opponent and find a way to win without destroying them. Keep talking. America isn't a boxing match, Mr. President. It's a dance. Everyone's got to move together, or the whole thing falls apart. You can't lead a dance by pushing people around. You got to show them the steps and trust them to follow. Trump was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, less performative, more genuine. You know, Mohammed, I built my career on being tough, on never backing down from a fight. But maybe there's something to what you're saying. Mr. President, being tough isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how much you can endure for the people you're supposed to protect. It's about taking the hits so they don't have to. The conversation lasted an hour. By the end, both men had reached an understanding that neither had expected. 3 days later, Trump made an announcement that stunned the political world. He was establishing a new White House initiative on unity and reconciliation, and he was asking Muhammad Ali to serve as an honorary advisor. Ali's response was swift and public. He would accept, but only under certain conditions. The initiative had to be bipartisan. It had to focus on real solutions, not political theater. And it had to be judged by its results, not its intentions. I'm not doing this for any president, Ali said in a rare public statement. I'm doing this for America, for the kids who need to see that people can disagree and still work together, for the parents who want their children to grow up in a country that's better than the one they inherited. The Ali Trump initiative, as it came to be known, lasted only 6 months. Political pressures, media scrutiny, and the realities of governing in a polarized environment eventually overwhelmed the effort. But in those 6 months, something remarkable happened. Ali, despite his physical limitations, became a bridge between communities that had stopped talking to each other. His presence at White House meetings lent a moral authority that transcended party lines. Republicans couldn't dismiss him as a liberal activist. He was Muhammad Ali, American hero. Democrats couldn't attack him for working with Trump. He was Muhammad Ali, civil rights champion. The initiative led to concrete changes. Police departments across the country implemented new community outreach programs. Schools received funding for conflict resolution training. Community centers were built in underserved neighborhoods. But perhaps more importantly, it changed how people thought about political disagreement. Ali's letter had shown that you could oppose someone's policies while still respecting their humanity. His willingness to work with Trump, despite their differences, demonstrated that progress sometimes requires uncomfortable conversations. On a warm spring evening, 6 months after that first phone call, Ali sat in his study writing another letter. This one wasn't to the president. It was to his granddaughter, who had asked him why he'd decided to work with someone he disagreed with. "Dear Amira," he wrote, "your grandfather learned a long time ago that the world isn't divided into good people and bad people. It's divided into people who are trying to do good and people who have forgotten how. Sometimes the best thing you can do is remind someone who they could be, instead of punishing them for who they are." The letter continued, "I didn't work with President Trump, because I agreed with him. I worked with him because I believed America is bigger than any one person's mistakes. I believed that if an old boxer from Louisville and a businessman from New York could find common ground, then maybe there's hope for all of us. Ali sealed the letter and placed it in his desk drawer, next to copies of the correspondence that had started it all. He knew that history would judge both him and Trump by their actions, not their words. But he also knew that sometimes the most important victories happen not in front of crowds, but in quiet moments when people choose understanding over anger. The phone rang one last time. It was Trump, calling to thank Ali for his service to the initiative. "Mohammed, I want you to know that working with you changed how I think about leadership. You taught me that real strength comes from bringing people together, not driving them apart." Ali smiled, his voice warm with genuine affection. "Mr. President, you taught me something too. You taught me that it's never too late for someone to grow, and that's the most American thing of all." As Ali hung up the phone, he looked out at the desert sunset one more time. Tomorrow, the political world would move on to new controversies and new conflicts. But tonight, an old boxer and a sitting president had proven that even in the most divided times, human connection could still triumph over political division. The letter that had started as a refusal had become something much more powerful, a reminder that democracy works best when people are willing to listen to each other, even when they disagree. This incredible story proves that real leadership isn't about winning every fight. It's about knowing which battles are worth fighting and which bridges are worth building. If this story moved you, smash that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to remember that hope isn't dead in America. Because stories like this remind us that even in our darkest moments, there are still people willing to choose unity over division, understanding over anger, and love over hate. What other untold stories of courage and reconciliation do you want to hear? Let me know in the comments below.